to the Guadalupe Mountains of Texas, rugged, forbidding country, where a man can get lost and die, or where he could have a gold mine of inexhaustible wealth. Such a man was Ben Sublett, a man with two faces. Hi, I'm Bill Burrud. The program is Treasure, and the story is a paradox. A paradox about a man known in legend as Ben Sublett, who had a fabled gold mine in the Southwest. Now, like these masks that I'm holding, comedy and tragedy, Ben Sublett's life was either a rollicking drinking spree or the sad struggle for existence by a sober, honest man, depending, of course, on which version of his life you accepted as the truth. Now, the town he lived in knew Ben Sublett as a drunken bum, but his family, well, they saw him as a fine, upstanding man trying to do his best to earn an honest living. Well, to shed more light not only on the story of Ben Sublett himself, but on the legendary gold mine, I want you to meet the man we sent to Texas to do the story for us, Ron Munns. Ron, you know, I've heard about Ben Sublett's story for many, many years. It's a fascinating one. What kind of research did you get on the story?
Well, some very fine research was done, Bill, by Tom Penfield, our treasure expert. Now, when he turned his file of research over to me, he said at that time that the Ben Sublett story was one of the most authentic lost mine stories of the Southwest. Of course, this was very exciting. And yet, when we went into the Southwest, we found that it was a paradox in a different way. Granted, facts were known about Sublett himself, where he lived and where he died was known, and yet it seems that the very gold that he possessed has distorted the facts about him. Prejudice has entered into it. And so it seems that he is a man with two faces. Now, we know that one of these faces must be false, but which one? That's the question, and that's the question that our film poses. Now, this is one of the true stories of the Southwest, and our story begins in western Texas.
This is El Paso, Texas. El Paso del Norte, the pass to the north from Old Mexico. Now, along with Juarez, Mexico, it's one of the fastest growing, most industrialized areas in western Texas and the Southwest. And the plaza here is a reminder of the old days of El Paso, the historical West that's its background. It's a city that commemorates its pioneers, and it recognizes the role that the railroad played in building this part of our country. Old engines, such as this one, not only brought the supplies that made the West, but also thousands of new pioneers. Now, one of the men that the railroad brought west in the middle of the last century was William C. Sublett, who became known in legend as Ben Sublett. He was a former Civil War soldier, former Confederate soldier, and he came west right after the Civil War, bringing with him his young wife, who tragically died 2 or 3 years later, leaving him with 3 small children. Now, they first settled in what is now the little town of Monahans, Texas, which is about 100 miles east of El Paso. And then they moved to Odessa, Texas, about 20 miles further east. And that's where William, or Ben Sublett, lived and where he died. Now, the wealth in those days, when Sublett was in this part of the country, was in cattle. And today, further north in the famous Panhandle, you can still see thousands of head of cattle, one of the great cattle-raising centers of the world. Sublett himself wasn't a cattleman. As a matter of fact, there aren't very many in that part of Texas where he lived. Today, the new wealth is oil. It's completely transformed the face of western Texas. As a matter of fact, we went for days without seeing a single head of cattle. But wherever you go in the prairie land now, it's dotted with oil wells.
This is the black gold of Texas, then, right?
That's right, and Bill, literally, it's made poor people into millionaires overnight. But although many things in this part of the country have been changed, there's still things that are very similar to the days when Sublett was here. For instance, the dust is still kicked up by the wind just about every day. There's hardly a day passes that you don't end up with a little bit of grit in your teeth, just the way the men that rode the range in Sublett's day did. Now, we went down this dusty street in Odessa, Texas, to meet one of the oldest pioneers in this part of the country, a man who actually knew William C. Sublett, and we're going to talk to him in just a moment. This is Julius Henderson. He's in his 80s now, and he's the oldest citizen in Odessa, Texas. Now, this is a real live cowboy. This man has ridden on horseback in almost every western state. Now, he was 14 years old when William Sublett died. So we actually didn't have a direct acquaintance with him, but Henderson's father did, and he can remember hearing his father and the other men of the town talk about Sublett and what a character he was. So we spent some time with him, and he told us one version of Sublett's life. And this is the version that the town tells, the version that Julius Henderson remembers. Now, the Ben Sublett that the town remembers would be found in one of the local saloons. And he'd be paying for his drinks with almost pure gold, nuggets of very valuable ore. Now, of course, this made him pretty attractive to some of the citizens of Odessa. And most all of them were pretty curious about him. But there were very few of them that actually admired him or thought very much about him at all, because they said that he was a man of questionable character, that he often left his 3 children in the care of other families and just led a pretty carefree kind of existence. Almost threw the money away that he secretly had possessed.
Well, Ron, a lot of people don't realize it, but this was the true days of the West, wasn't it?
That's right. This is what we know today, Bill, as the Wild West. Now, one of the stories that's told about Sublett goes like this, that one day he made one of his frequent trips to the Guadalupe Range. Now, every once in a while he'd take these trips, and they'd last sometimes for several weeks. And when he returned, he'd return with more gold. Now, this particular trip, he was followed by 2 desperados. There were plenty of men like this, men who would stop at nothing to find out where he was getting this gold. Now, Sublett led them deep into the Guadalupe Range, and it took them actually several days to follow him. Now, the 2 desperados didn't realize just how clever of a man old Ben Sublett was. He was a pretty shrewd character, one that wasn't going to be caught unawares. Now, the 2 desperados probably also thought they were dealing with a pretty dangerous character, when actually they were dealing with a man whose main purpose in life was just to have a lot of fun. Bill, how could they question a man about his gold or any of his secrets when he was in no condition to even carry on a sober conversation?
Well, that's certainly one way to hide his secret, anyway.
Well, the people of Edessa came to the conclusion that Sublett's best defense was the fact that it was so difficult to take him or his gold seriously. So after a while, the townspeople and the desperados just ignored Sublett and his wealth, dismissed him as just a harmless old crank, and left him to lead a pretty lonely existence. And according to the town's version of his life, he died alone. Now there's some disagreement just what caused his death, but most of the people felt that the main cause of his physical decay was the bottle. And so Ben Sublett died without ever revealing the source of the gold that made him so notorious.
Well, Ron, that is quite a story. Apparently the townspeople just saw Ben Sublett as an irresponsible loafer.
Yes, Bill, undoubtedly a great many of them did. And I think also that there were a great many that completely discounted the idea of a mine. Now, granted, they couldn't explain where Sublett did get his gold, but they didn't think that a mine existed. Now, we've seen one version of Sublett's life, and yet there's another version. As I said, this was a man with two faces, and we've seen one of them. But the family, his descendants, tell an entirely different story. It's a story that completely contradicts the idea that this was a bad man. And yet, it has as much claim to validity as the story that you've just seen.
Now, to find out the other side of the story, we had to talk to members of the family. Now, Jenny, Sublett's youngest daughter, has 108 descendants still in the great Southwest. For instance, Mrs. Ollie Severance lives in El Paso. She's a saleswoman, a granddaughter of Ben Sublett. And this is House, New Mexico. As you can see, a pretty tiny little place. Now, we went there to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Davenport. She is another granddaughter of Ben Sublett. Now, people such as this, members of the Sublett family, told us the family's version of Sublett's life. Now, people say this is the family, these people here, that were cheated of millions because Sublett never told even his family where he got the gold. Now, we found to get the complete family version of Sublett's life, we had to go further into New Mexico, further north, up to Bandelier National Monument to speak to Mrs. Ethel Lovelady. Now, Bandelier is one of the most fabulous sections of New Mexico. And while we were waiting to speak with Mrs. Lovelady, we had the opportunity to film these remarkable prehistoric Indian ruins. Now, this was part of the Pueblo civilization, the Pueblo Indians. We find some remarkable cliff dwellings and some very fine examples of Indian cave dwellings. In fact, the sides of the caves are still black from smoke, from fires that were lit thousands of years ago. But finally, we had the opportunity to speak to Mrs. Ethel Lovelady and hear, in her words, the family's version.
Now, Grandpa was not primarily a gold seeker. He's been pictured as such. But his first aim was help for his children. In seeking help for his children, he took them way out on the frontier, and he was employed for some years as a hunter for the TP Railroad when they were building the Texas and Pacific. He furnished meat for the crews that built the railroad. And it was while he was doing this work that he found the gold mine for which he is so famous. No one ever saw the mine but him, but my mother saw a nugget as large as a robin's egg. Uncle Billy Smith, a friend of Grandpa's, who was a sheriff down there in Texas, told my mother after his death that Grandpa had told him that he thought the mine was an evil thing. Friends, people he had thought were his friends, had tried to kill him for the knowledge of it. And he wasn't sure that great wealth would be good for his family. He thought the men that his daughters were married to would probably be better to them if they had to make a living. And his son, he felt, if he had great wealth, would probably never do a bit of work the rest of his life.
And now we're going to see the version of Ben Sublett's life that the family tells. Now, the family says that if there was anyone in Odessa, Texas, when Sublett was alive, that held him in disrepute, they did so out of jealousy, out of envy. Now, they agree that Ben Sublett was a mysterious character. He had this gold and nobody knew where he got it. But they say he didn't throw it away. He didn't spend it in the saloons. He spent it for the welfare of his family. And the family says that Sublett was an honest man. But there were those in Odessa that weren't so honest, and he knew that. As a matter of fact, the gold that he possessed placed him in danger more than once. And they tell the story that one day he was held captive by two desperados. But this version is different in that the two desperados were in deadly seriousness. As a matter of fact, his very life was in danger if he didn't tell them where the source of gold was. But they found they were dealing with an obstinate man, a strong man. For all their threats, he didn't tell them one single fact. Vengeance for not telling them where the gold was, they left him in the Guadalupe Range, abandoned to die.
Well, you can certainly see what evil gold can be.
Yes, that's what Sublett learned. And as a matter of fact, on this particular occasion, he was lucky to escape with his life. It seems that one of the desperados could see no good reason for leaving Ben Sublett alive. Fortunately, his partner persuaded him to leave. And so Ben Sublett managed to survive that day. But ordeals such as that did leave their scars. It imprinted on his mind the fact that the gold that he had possessed was not simply a matter of good fortune, it was also a thing of evil. Evil that he might be passing on to his family if he ever told them where he got the gold. And so in the years that followed, he never revealed his secret to even the most immediate members of his family. Now, the family says he didn't die alone, but he died in the company of his good friend, Uncle Billy Smith, who was a lawman. And further, they say that his death was premature, that perhaps in time, he would have told them where the gold was. Who knows, perhaps he started to on that day. But death interrupted.
Well, Ron, certainly if that version is true, Sublett led a most sad and unhappy life. I can certainly understand now, though, why we call him a man with two faces.
Yes, Bill, he was a controversial character then, and he is to this day. Now we've shown you both versions of Sublett's story, and we don't want to force any conclusions on you, either about Sublett himself or about the mine. We would like to point out this, that it's up to you which story you believe. But if you believe the first one, the town version, the story that Julius Henderson remembers, well, then it's most likely that there is no mine and there's nothing worth searching for. But if you believe the second version, the version that the family tells, if you believe in Sublett as an honest man, a courageous frontiersman, then most likely there is a mine probably someplace in either southern New Mexico or western Texas. It hasn't been discovered yet. It's waiting there, waiting for someone to discover it.
Now, legend places the mine somewhere between the Pecos River on the east and the Rio Grande on the west, that portion of the Rio Grande which runs from north to south. And in particular, it's said that the mine is in the rugged Guadalupe Range, which is right on the border between southern New Mexico and western Texas. Now, to get to the Guadalupes, either from El Paso or from Odessa, Sublett would have had to cross over some of the most desolate country in this part of the United States. It's semi-arid. It's very hard traveling even today. These Guadalupes have made a great claim on human life. You might say that Sublett is a victim of the Guadalupes. Today you can see his grave in Odessa, Texas. William C. Sublett, his real name. Their bodies are buried in the dust, but their names shall live forever. Certainly true in the case of Ben Sublett. Now, ironically enough, his son, who he wished to save from a life of little purpose, spent his whole life looking for this lost mine and died penniless and is buried in an unmarked grave in Artesia, New Mexico. So you can see the great claim that the Guadalupes put on the Sublett family. And others have lost their lives looking for gold, looking for wealth in these rugged mountains. So you should make up your mind before you venture forth into the Guadalupes, which story you believe, which of the two stories we've told. Do you believe in this face of Sublett, the honest frontiersman, or do you believe in the other face, the disreputable, the questionable Sublett? Bill, that's the story of the man with two faces.
Well, thank you very much, Ron, for a fascinating treasure tale. There you have it, the story of Ben Sublett. To some a hero, to others a rascal. But in any event, a man that people will talk about as long as they gather around campfires and spin yarns about treasure. Speaking of spinning yarns, we appreciate getting mail from you. Perhaps you have a treasure tale yourself. Why not write it to us in a letter to the station that you're watching right now? If we do the story and we find the treasure, we'll split it with you. This is Bill Burrud saying until we meet once again in search of treasure, goodbye and good